Today we're going to look at functions, and first and foremost, let's have a look at the function that we've already been very familiar with, which is the main function, right? So this is the main function. You'll notice a few things when we look at this. First is you can say a word, or almost a word, int, right? The term int there, which is short for integer, and then we have main, and then we have parentheses or brackets, right? So the reason we have main here, or rather why we have to have main here, is because we are returning. We had main here. We have integer here, int, right? Which means that we have to return an integer by the end of this, or rather somewhere within this function. Ideally, at the end, we have to return an integer, and that happens in line 17 here, right? Return 0, right? So that has to be there. We also have these brackets, and in reality, a function can expect something from another function, right? So we can have a particular function where it is expecting something, right? So we'll have a look at this thing called the function, right? So that is this week's lesson, right? So identify need for subprograms. So what happens with C and C++ and a lot of programming languages is that we can have what we call modules that we can reuse, so that we don't have to recreate it all over again. Right? Let's say, for example, we have things such as square rooting. Square root is a particular calculation where a few things has to be done, a few division, subdivision, and so on. Right? So it's ideal for that to just be ingrained, meaning that we have a function called square root. Hence, we don't have to have individual programmers having to program how to do a square root, right? So, goals here is first to identify the need for subprograms. Why do we have that? Why is it necessary to have subprograms, right? To be able to program functions and procedures. So we look at functions today, right? To become familiar with the concept of parameter passing. So what happens is that once you have a function, essentially, you'll actually have a subprogram inside your main. It's like, you imagine you have main, and then inside main you actually have another calling function. Main is the calling function, and in main you actually have another function being called by main, right? Let's say we call it function 0 or something, or function 1, right? So function 1 will expect something from main and will return something to main. So main here is what we call the calling function. Let's say we call it integer to send or something, right? So function 1 will expect something to be sent over. Let's say to send will be sent over to function 1, and function 1 will do something with to send and then return something back to main, right? And we get to decide what function 1 does, and that is what I said earlier, the program being modular, right? So to become familiar with the concept of parameter passing, this is what parameter passing is all about. To send here will be sent over to function 1, right? So that is parameter passing, right? Recognize when to use value and reference passing. So sometimes we use reference, sometimes we use value passing. This particular case here, it's value passing. I'm passing a value. I'm passing a value which is stored inside the box, the integer box called to send. Right. Appreciate the importance of function comments. So it's important to give comments for functions, because if we're writing something like this and we have no idea what function does, it makes for a lot of headache. So you want to put some kind of comments to just remind yourself what function 1 is all about, for example. Right? Determine the scope of variables, minimize use of side effects, global variables, develop strategies for composing complex tasks into simpler ones. So we focus on the first few first, because these might be a bit too much, right? And we'll see if we can cover that in today's session, right? So why use function? There's a procedure to repeat so that we don't have to repeat code. So we've learned things such as looping and so on, where for things which are repeatedly done, we can do it in a loop, but sometimes that is not adequate, or there might be more complicated things that makes more sense to actually do it elsewhere. right? For example, square rooting and so on. Right? Procedure is particularly complex, so it helps out coding or debugging to separate it out. And this is possibly using that procedure in the future, perhaps in another program. So when we write a procedure or a function, it's because we imagine that it's something useful. We imagine that it's something useful that we can reuse